Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This Shabbat, I want to talk to you about something going on in the state of New Jersey. It's not connected to our Torah reading, and it's not connected to our Haftorah, but I think it's important for all of you to stay aware of it and why it's so important to me, and I hope it will become important to you as well. Perhaps you've been following along in the news, and it's been something I've been quite outspoken about in the last week, and you'll probably be seeing more about this in the next few weeks. At the very end of the latest New Jersey Congress, the end of Governor Murphy's second term, the governor, along with the legislative officials, decided to take a piece of legislation that was tracked to be passed, on the road to being passed, about to be passed, and they tabled it. It did not get passed. It got pushed aside. And with the changing of governors, even in the same party, it most likely will not rise to its prominence again, at least not without a lot of work. I think all of you know that when legislation rises to get passed, it doesn't just happen based on something that sounds good. There are a lot of lobbying efforts, a lot of elbow grease and resources and time and energy that brings these things to the forefront. And so too was the case with this legislation. What we had hoped to bring and to pass in the state of New Jersey was the passing of legislation that canonized forever the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance defined, I believe the year was in 2015 or 2016, what the parameters of anti-Semitism was. And today, Jewish people felt that it was incumbent upon our legislation to put these guardrails up as to what defines anti-Semitism. And the reason that we put these guardrails up wasn't for pleasure, wasn't for fun, but because of a serious reality that we were facing in New Jersey and frankly throughout the United States of America and the world, where Jews were being targeted because of their Jewish identity and their inherent connection to the state of Israel. The IHRA, by defining what is anti-Semitism, protects Jewish people from forms of speech that would be qualified as hate speech and incitement. We all know that all of us are entitled to freedom of speech. I can say things even if they're abhorrent. It was Voltaire who said long ago, "I will defend your right to say what you're saying even though I find your words abhorrent." That's what freedom of speech is. But we know that even within freedom of speech, we have boundaries. We can't yell fire in a crowded building because it could lead to chaos. But we can yell fire in a crowded building when? If there's a fire. That is allowed. In fact, it's encouraged. And if we don't yell fire in that crowded building, then we're actually involved in a different crime. So there has to be some context with these rules and these laws. And what was happening on university campuses, like Columbia, like Rutgers, like Harvard, like Berkeley, and far too many others, was frightening for Jewish students and Jewish families. What was happening walking down the streets and in the public square was causing people to tremble. And the worst part was that when we would see these protesters saying abhorrent and terrible things to people walking across campus with a yarmulke on their head, or people walking down the street who identified as Jewish, or were walking out with their grocery bags that had challahs out on a Friday, and they were identified as Jewish, they would claim not only protection under free speech, but that what they were saying did not constitute hate or anti-Semitism. So we wanted to canonize what was hate and anti-Semitism. We wanted to create safety for our students and for our constituents. And what became the thought process of then Governor Murphy was that by passing this legislation, it would hurt the Democratic ticket in the upcoming midterms. That Democrats who were leaning far left and were part of particular groups would take out their vengeance and not support other Democrats a year and a half from now. I find that hard to digest because it's antithetical to the way that I work. If you were to look at my voter registration card, it would say Democrat. If you ask me what are the 10 things that are most important to me in the world, I'd say 8 of them probably fall into the category of where Democrats lobby and caucus today. But I believe in calling balls and strikes when I see them and how I see them. And when something right is happening or something wrong is happening, I don't care which party is from it or for it or against it, I'm going to use my voice about it. So I'm not going to push for a legislation to be pulled or fought for based on what it's going to do in a midterm if it's good for the people and good for the country. But that's not how some political minds think. And in a form, in my estimation, it has led to corruption in our country. To think that way about only your midterms and not what helps your constituents, I think is corruption and criminal. And I am angry and ashamed at Governor Murphy for these actions if indeed they are true. So allow me to explain a little bit about IHRA and about how it works and where we are and what we should be doing. Because we spent a little bit more than a year and a few $1 million pushing this legislation all the way through, and it had the votes to pass. It was going to pass, and it would have been canonized as part of New Jersey state law. So that if someone in Lakewood or someone in Teaneck or someone in Closter were walking out of any store and haters who hate Israel or hate Jews, or whether they're the variety that like to burn crosses on lawns or they're the variety that believe that the state of Israel shouldn't exist, they could be stopped and even sanctioned and imprisoned for their behaviors should it cross a line, should their speech turn to hate speech or incitement. But there were groups lobbying against it, groups that range from the ACLU to groups like CARE and their subsidiaries, who said they are able to define what anti-Semitism is better than what we, the Jewish community, and our lobbyists could. Isn't that laughable? Could you imagine a room full of 60 and 70-year-old men convening to define what misogyny is? Could you imagine a group of only white people, third generation in America, who would determine what racism is? Could we determine such a thing without those other groups in it? I have been found liable, guilty at different times in my life of saying things that are insensitive. I've made comments that I thought were either funny or reflective or thoughtful, and a group of people have said to me on different occasions, that is offensive. And the reason why, and by the way, it's probably happened to some of you too, and the reason why I am dialed out of it is because I'm not part of that group. So if I make a comment that is hurtful to the LGBTQ community, not by design, it's important as a non-LGBTQ member but ally to know what it is that causes that pinch point, that hurt, that pain. And what groups like CARE and others from other civil liberty union groups want to do is they want to take away a Jewish voice in defining what anti-Semitism is. Saying, we want to critique you, we can do this. And the irony is, they're saying, as a whole, we really have no problem with you Jews. It's your homeland we have a problem with. It's that state of Israel we have a problem with. And in some as my father would say, verkakt way, there are a few group of people who could say, oh, I can understand that divide. Could you imagine an elected official today or anyone lobbying today who says, hey, I want you to know I hate Jamaica. Jamaica should no longer exist. Jamaica is full of colonizers. Jamaica is an apartheid country. I got no problem with Jamaicans, but Jamaica, it's gotta go. And if you're living in Jamaica, gotta go. And the people from Jamaica, gotta go. But if you're a Jamaican, you're okay. It's nonsensical. Doesn't fit. We would never digest that. Could you imagine a group saying, I have no problem with black people, but everyone in Africa has to go? It's absurdity that that would happen. But for some reason or another, these groups of people making these lobbies today, pushing against the IHRA, are saying, Jews are okay, you can be Jewish, but you shouldn't have a homeland, and all the people who live there are a problem, and anything you do that supports the homeland is a problem, and even having that flag up in this synagogue, that's a problem, you shouldn't have that. It's ridiculous. It's silly. We are intrinsically connected as a people, as a religion, and as a nation. And those who want to come in with the scalpel and try and divide it can't, because that is part of the sinew of how we are together. And it's shameful that they want to put the definition on us of what defines anti-Semitism. So what do we do? How do we handle this going forward? Well, there are two actions that I think need to happen, short-term and long-term. And this is where all of you come in. We have a new governor as of the last 4 or 5 days. I guess what's today? 4 days. Mikey Sherrill is our new governor. And I believe that incumbent on Mikey Sherrill is an executive order that she can put into place as a stopgap measure for an amount of time, whether it's 6 months to 18 months, that basically enacts the thinking and the ruling of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism here in New Jersey until it becomes legislation. To say that we knew this legislation was formed to be passed, it was ready to be passed, and the legislative body came to an end, and in the interim, I'd like to pass this, to hold it as an executive measure, which basically gets us to a similar finish line in the short term. And what else it does is it gives us 18 months with this newly elected body, which hasn't changed too dramatically, to move forward with this legislation, with this new body, instead of starting from scratch all over again, to tire us out and to waste our resources. And if we can get to that finish line, well, that would be a very good thing for us. But when we lose this fight, don't think it's just bad for New Jersey. It's bad for the country and it's bad for the world, and here's what I'll tell you. Because if in New Jersey, which has the second largest population of Jews outside of New York, of any of the states, New Jersey is second. It beats California, beats Florida. If they can say, nope, the Jews can't define what anti-Semitism is in this state, and this law doesn't pass, what do you think it says to other states that don't have the same level of Jewish influence, that don't have the same level of Jewish population? What happens if they're worried about passing legislation that might be similar in tenor in Oregon, in Washington State, in New Mexico? Those who are the naysayers and pushing against it will feel a sense of muscle if it's not happening there. That's reason for us to worry and to not tire or give up. It is a gut blow. There is no question about it. It has deflated so much energy and effort that we thought we were going to see across that finish line, and then in the last minute, that finish line was ripped from us. But we have a responsibility in the interim. Responsibility one, reach out to our new governor. Wish her congratulations on this new role and encourage her to sign this executive order. And for those of you who say, Rabbi, that sounds great, I really don't know how to do that, that's where we come in. We're going to draft a letter in the coming week, and we're going to ask all of you to sign on to it. It's a quick signature. Read the letter, make sure you're comfortable with it, and then ask the governor to sign on to that executive order. And then be prepared to sign on to those letters as well that will respond to the legislature to say, pick it back up in this legislative process and pass this definition of IHRA for the state of New Jersey. As silly as it sounds, those letters and those signatures, as exhausted as I get signing my name to so many of them, they have impact, especially with these legislative bodies. So just like Governor Murphy was scared of what would happen in the midterms, and he decided to table this legislation, when legislators see 1,000 signatures or 250 rabbis representing thousands and thousands of constituents signing a particular letter, that causes them to pause and to see what they're saying and to hear their voice. And that's where your voice matters. And it matters here. We know when there is hatred coming at us. And in the last 24 plus months, I have never felt so much collective hatred against the Jewish people. And I imagine on a different scale and in different ways, not necessarily apples to apples, but at least apples to oranges in the category of still being fruit. This is what Europe must have felt like in the early and mid-30s. There's no legislation necessarily changing in this country, but there are reasons to worry, and there are scary moments ahead of us. And for all of you who might pause just for a moment and say, well, maybe this is because of Israel, and maybe this is because of the current government, I want to tell you two quick things. The first is there is nothing, I want to be abundantly clear on this, nothing with a capital N, that within the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, that would inhibit any human being from speaking out against any elected government of the state of Israel. And if you don't believe me, just look at any Jewish newspaper for the last 78 years who have criticized every single member of the Israeli Knesset, whether to the right or to the left, the top or the bottom, starting wars or ending wars, whether it was Golda Meir or Yitzhak Rabin or Benjamin Netanyahu, we have found fault with all of them. And we're not afraid to use our voice against them, and nothing in the IHRA would stop that. There is nothing that inhibits the idea of free speech to critique how an elected government is handling itself. But that's different from determining whether or not that government has the right to exist, number one, and two, whether people who are connected through the tissue of their religion and state identity to that government should be targeted outside of it. Just like we would never target Jamaicans here for something Jamaica is doing, and just like none of us are seeing any form of protest at anything that is owned or operated by Russians in this country 3 years after they've invaded Ukraine, nothing on that front should happen to the Jewish people the way that it has been. And here's the second line I'm going to tell you, and I think this should cause us all to really pause on this front, because if you don't have memory when it comes to this topic, you're in trouble. In 1935, as anti-Semitism was really skyrocketing in Europe in particular, there was a large group of people, not a small group, but a large group, that banded together and said, you know, if the Jewish people only had a state of their own, anti-Semitism would go away. And then on October 8th, 2023, there was another large group of people, similar in size, who stood up and said, you know, if the Jewish people would just forsake their state, anti-Semitism would go away. And what that reminds us of is that whether we have a state or not, there will always be a focus on us as a people, always be a focus on us as a religion, and always be a focus on us as a state and our existence. And if we learn to tolerate it and not push back, then the stakes will only grow and the danger will only increase. It's not something for us to just be aware of and to just be outraged by. There's going to be a place for all of us to roll up our sleeves and get involved. So I thank you in advance for being a part of that process and agreeing to stop this insanity and this horrible behavior and this level of corruption where and when we find it, so that we can be that beacon to other states and other places, and we can be that source of hope to our little kids who are here today that one day are going to walk through a campus, whether they wear a yarmulke or a Jewish star or walking to a Hillel or a Jewish sorority. They can feel that sense of comfort and safety that they deserve to have. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.